Well, family in New Orleans in general is important, and it was important in our family as well. My earliest memories, though, are few, really. I was about to say far and few between, but they're few. Because from birth until, let's say, age 6, when my parents divorced, I don't have very many memories. But the ones that I do have were pretty good memories. I remember liking things that probably some children wouldn't like. I would, I liked cod liver oil. So we would get it in, my mother would get it as a medicinal thing, and she would get it in little rubber, thin rubber type, um, looks like a tear, almost like a droplet. And you could just squeeze it out into your mouth. Well, I would go in and get extra of that, along with baby aspirin and children's vitamins. It was called Chock's vitamins, CHOCK, I believe is the way it was spelled. And so I shouldn't have done that, but who knows what damage it did to my body, none that I know of. I used to love the sound of being on the rocking horse. My parents had a rocking horse for me in my room, or in what ended up being Uncle Wayne's room when he was born. I can't remember. And I just like to go back and forth. So those kind of consistent sounds. So which means I also like the sound of the washing machine. I can't remember if we had a dryer. I don't think we did. I think we had a clothesline. But my mother, because she was a school teacher, working probably at that time at Lockett Elementary, she would do her chores, after dinner and dishes and all that at nighttime. I also enjoy watching television on Saturdays. I only remember watching it on Saturdays. And I would watch the cartoons from 9 in the morning till 12 noon, and that was it. And one sad day was November of 1963, and I kept waiting for the cartoons to come on. And I waited. My mother she didn't seem like she was doing very well. I was 5 years old. And I'm ashamed to say the cartoons didn't come on, and I was sad about it because President John F. Kennedy that was his funeral procession and the whole thing. So that blanketed the airways, and they canceled the cartoons. And I didn't understand that, but they did the right thing. You can make it without cartoons. I also remember having a couple of, don't remember all the details, but birthday parties when I was older. When I say older, like 4 or 5, maybe 6. And my cousins Stanley and Jeffrey would come over. Uncle Stanley and Aunt Shirley's sons. Stanley is 2 months younger than me, and Jeffrey is about a year and a half younger than me. And we enjoyed that. And I can't remember if I had one where my cousin Janelle would come over. She's 3 years younger, so maybe not. And it would be neighborhood friends too. So my mother would spend time with me reading, helping me with my favorite subject, math, things like that. But, well, that was later on, sorry, because that was up to age 6. But she did that later on as well. I have one memory of going to the movies with my parents. So that would be my father, Tyree James, Tyre, and my mother, Aurelia Brown James then, and then Aurelia Brown Young. And I think I realized later on that I longed for my father's attention, time. he worked as a clerk at the United States Post Office. And so he worked a lot of nights. And so I probably didn't see him as much as I wanted to see him. He was, maybe not there during my waking hours all the time. But I also have always just liked attention. But anyway, as you know, so at this particular time, coming from the movies, we didn't use seatbelts. So I was sitting on the back seat of the car, and then I lay across the back seat. I could fit all the way across. And I was trying to fall asleep, but I really didn't. But I looked like I was asleep. And in the spirit of the stealing, I basically lied, deceived my parents that I was asleep just so my father would pick me up and carry me into my bed. And I did the act all the way through, unfortunately. But like I said, I realized later on that was just one of my many cries for attention. So anyway, those are the main things I remember as a child. And just having, I guess the other thing, just having a hardworking mom, a hardworking dad, and a beautiful mother. I remember that. The other things I remember at that age would be just getting together with my grandparents, getting together with my cousins. So my mother's parents, Moses Brown Jr. and Aurelia Brown, and then the siblings and their children who lived in the New Orleans area, which we can talk more about later. That could take a long time as far as things I learned from my grandparents or from my aunts and uncles, but focusing on Mama and Papa, they were very, very special to me. My grandmother passed away, I believe it was 1981, and my grandfather 1989. And it's only probably been within the last 5 years that I stopped waking up at night crying because I miss my grandfather. Never really told you that, but and my grandmother was just one of those people who had that ability, like her daughter, Aunt Boo, as we called her, Aunt Elizabeth, her youngest child and youngest daughter, of course, had the ability to make everybody feel like he or she was the most important person in the world. So my grandmother was a caregiver. She was always watching over us and just loved being in their home. They weren't wealthy. None of us were. But whatever they had, they would share it. And I remember, fast forward, one particular memory of something I learned from her and something I tried to teach my children. And that is, we're blessed to have the right to vote in this country. And it's not an option not to vote. And one person that taught me that was my grandmother. So there was some election in New Orleans. I have no idea what election it was. I don't know what year it was, but it was when she was still able to walk, but only with the use of a cane. And the polling place was about a block and a half away, I think, maybe 2.5 blocks. And she, with the cane, would have somebody walk her there, or she would drive there. It was inconvenient, but she made it a priority. And I remember one time walking her to, so that with voting, the other thing is her love was sacrificial. So one time I was walking her probably the equivalent of a block, because it was half a block to the corner, and we crossed to the other side, and then crossed the street, and then walked another half a block to the hairdresser. So I walked her to the hairdresser because, again, the cane, she couldn't go too fast. I was probably a teenager at the time. And I said, now, Mama, which is like Mama and Papa, Mama, if a car comes and somebody's driving, this is a regular neighborhood, people shouldn't be driving fast, but people did. If someone comes fast, then I already have a plan. I'm going to try to gently push you away, and then I'll try to save myself. But if I can't do that, can't save myself, I'll at least try to make sure I save you. She understood what I said, lifted her cane as if she was going to hit me with it, and said, don't worry about me. You take care of yourself. And her countenance, her face completely changed. She was very serious. And that's the way she was. She was the epitome of sacrificial love. I just saw it all the time. And then one time when, fast forward, when I was about 16, it seemed like I was always getting respiratory sicknesses, but this time I had mononucleosis. They call it the kissing disease. So probably that's why I always tell y'all, don't tell my children, don't drink after people, because that's the main way you get it. You can also get it from kissing, but easily from drinking after somebody that has it. It's just a virus, mononucleosis. So I had it, and probably because my body, I've had the flu so many times and cold so many times, I had a really bad case. Couldn't go to school. So my mother could work and my parents could work. In this case, Pawpaw, and who my mother married in 49 years ago, actually, September 5th. Because of that, my grandmother took care of me at her house. And again, so she's using a cane, right? But I remember her bringing me orange juice and water and checking on me. And every step was effort and making sure I was taken care of. And I just felt like all I had to focus on doing was getting well. All my other needs were taken care of. And I could give many other examples. I don't remember them all, but she was just like that.
I know you passed on several lessons from Papa. What are some, pick like a one or two things you always remember?
His wisdom. His wisdom. I've quoted him so many times. The one that really stands out, a story that really stands out to me, is when he told me about when he was dating Mama. And he would go over and see her at her parents' house. And my grandmother would complain sometimes because he spent a lot of his time with her parents, particularly her father. And she inquired, I thought you came to see me. Why are you talking to my parents? And he said, look, I'm going to hopefully spend the rest of my life with you. But I don't know how to be married. I don't know how to raise a family. Your parents do. And I'm trying to learn from them. And the thing he would say that he lived out in doing that, so she understood, thankfully, and let him do that. And of course, the rest is history. But the thing he told me was, everybody knows something, Brian, that you don't know. From the smallest child to the oldest adult. And your job is to find out what it is. And Uncle Wayne told me later on that my younger brother, that he also talked about the importance of gaining knowledge, even if you don't think you're going to get to use it. If God is leading you to gain that knowledge, even if you don't finish the course, and if you don't get to finish reading that book, do what you're able to do and trust him that he has a purpose if you remember it, it can help you down the road. And so just really sitting at his feet, getting that type of wisdom. Everybody knows something, and I've used that, applied that in so many situations. The other thing was he was the boss at his house. He was in charge. And I believe he was a loving leader. But his grandchildren, yes, sir, no, sir. His children, yes, sir, no, sir. Even when they were in their 50s and 60s, yes, sir, no, sir. And they respected him. But when he couldn't drive anymore, he needed people to transport him. And I remember he also smoked cigars, which I can't handle cigarette smoke, even though I grew up with parents who did. It was really rough, Uncle Wayne and me, but we survived that, along with the water that wasn't too great in New Orleans and a whole bunch of other things. But everybody has their situations, and we found ways to deal with it. So I was trying to think when I was going to take him somewhere. How am I going to ask Papa, this man that I hold in such high esteem and would never want to disappoint, how am I going to ask him not to smoke a cigar in my car? So I finally, that first time, probably learned that from him, just be upfront, be honest. I said, would you mind not smoking a cigar while you're in the car, really trying to keep it smoke-free? He said, Brian, I will not smoke, and let me tell you why. When I'm at my house, I make the rules. This is your car, you make the rules, and you should make sure everybody follows your rules. I was so relieved. So those are two things. I experienced segregation in school starting in what's called junior high, starting at 7th grade, 7th to 9th. And then in high school, and then in college. So all in New Orleans. Also experienced it to a certain extent outside of school, but noticed it more in school. So I started at Martinez, which was a private, I think my mother and father paid for private tuition for kindergarten. My mother, being a teacher, wanted me to have his best, and I know it was a sacrifice for them to do that. And then I went to public school at Valina C. Jones, same school that my wife went to. In fact, we started at the same time, we were born the same year. And but I didn't really know her. So my first grade time, that was around the time when my parents were divorced. I was living with my grandparents by then. And so that school was in that district, same school my aunts and uncles went to, including my mother. So I didn't really notice any segregation or anything there because it was a all-black school. And but it was, I didn't see that at the time, didn't understand at the time, but I knew I had high-quality teachers. I knew that they were committed to my success, but I didn't have anything to compare it to. So I think that's just the way it was. Whether it was better than any other, I have no idea, because it's not like we competed in sports and all that, and I didn't play any sports anyway. So it was actually a good experience. And my favorite subject was math. I got a chance to enjoy that. But in junior high school, I jokingly, so this is tongue-in-cheek, but part of it's true, part of it's not true, they would check us for weapons as we entered the school. There was Gregory Junior High School. So this is now, fast forward, my mama and Papa. Papa is Lloyd DeYoung, my mother's second husband. They moved in an apartment complex so I could go to Gregory. to get a better education. But it was an integrated school, and the fights were not necessarily all the result of black-white or, white-Latino issues, but it just seemed to be a problem, and I wasn't into fighting and all that. So they would check us for weapons, literally, and we would go in, and then I would jokingly say, if we didn't have one, they would give us one for protection while we're in school. But and then when you came out, there would be police officers there. So, once you kind of got past the perimeter of the school, within about a half a block, you're on your own, walking home. And thankfully, I never had any problems, and I would either walk alone or walk with some of my friends. I was very social in junior high and also very social in high school. I remember the racism more in high school. I remember because I think that was a later time when things kind of began to erupt again. So that's 1973 to 1976. There were a lot of the Black Power movement, a lot of things were going on there. That's when we started calling ourselves Black. We gave ourselves an identity, a way of describing ourselves instead of letting someone else do it for us, which was really a good thing. There were some good things with that movement, some bad things. But I remember, probably because of all that was going on around me in parts of the country, as well as in New Orleans, you would go into the restroom and, there would be somebody had written on the walls, run, you'll go home, nigga, or something like that. I was about to say run, nigga, run, but that's not what it said. The cafeteria had two sides to it. One side, if you're walking in, as I recall, the left side was the kind of a fast food type hamburgers, hot dogs, chicken sandwiches, things like that. If you didn't want to get what was the healthier meal on the right side, I think the price was about the same. We didn't get free lunch, but maybe some people did, but I don't think most people did. And so, but you could sit wherever you wanted. And basically, you get your food to wherever you want. The whites sat on one side, the blacks sat on the other side, and the lighter skinned blacks sat in a different section. So even the blacks segregated amongst themselves, which unfortunately, something that we were taught that wasn't true, that the lighter your skin, the better you are, which is utterly ridiculous. And I'm so glad we don't have any pictures of Jesus, because everybody would say, well, not that color, then you not the right color, So God in his infinite wisdom did that. But I was a rebel from the beginning. So if you wonder where you got it from, Jennifer, that's, but in a positive way. And that is, I had friends in all three sections. And one day I would sit with one section, section 1, section 2, or section 3, white, black, or light-skinned black. And I would get flack from the ones in the different sections. Brian, why are you sitting over there? Because I have friends over there. And if they couldn't deal with it, they couldn't deal with it. And that's something I learned from Papa also. Just be yourself. And don't worry about what people think. It took me a long, long time before I actually began really doing that, but it was an incremental thing, and that's one way I implemented it. Did the same thing in college. My grandparents were members of, the actual name on the charter was St. John the Divine Missionary Baptist Church. We just called it St. John Divine Baptist Church. I can't remember the name of the street, but it's in the 7th Ward in New Orleans. Again, walking distance from my grandparents' house. It's a few blocks longer from going to Jones School. So as I recall, it was 9.5 blocks away. Jones School was 6 blocks away. And 12 blocks made a mile, basically. So it kind of gives you an idea. Half a mile, 3/4 of a mile. And I did walk to church sometimes with the suit on. But, started going to that church. My first Sunday school teacher I remember was Hallie Mitchell, who my family got to meet before she went to be with the Lord. She was a very saintly, godly woman, someone that really tried to, I think, help disciple my mother and other women at the church. She was probably the first person that shared the gospel that I understood, or maybe didn't understand, but the first time I heard it. Our pastor, Reverend Willie Newman, who you also met that same time my family met, because she invited him over, he was the first pastor I remember. There may have been another one when I was too young to remember. And he was just a really good teacher and had a good understanding of the gospel. But it wasn't until I was about 9 years old that I understood that I was a sinner and what the consequences were. And I started getting really concerned about hell, because I knew I was a sinner, because I already had stolen the aspirin and stolen the Chalk's vitamins. And at this point, living with my grandparents, I was stealing coins from my great-grandfather's dresser drawer and stealing coins from my mother's purse, which I later apologized to them for and made restitution. But there was no doubt I had a sin problem. I knew that. But I also didn't like the idea of somebody telling me what to do. So I knew that if you're going to do this thing right, then if you're going to become a Christian, then the way to get the greatest benefit from it is to make Jesus Lord. And I really struggled with that. And I struggled with it for a long, long time. And God was very patient. He wooed me. And so either I was 9 or 10 when I actually, the way I put it, gave in. Said, I surrender. I had some doubts later on about my salvation, but I really believe that's when I got saved. And my mother was able to come to the baptism because she was in the hospital. She was able to let her out for that. And Uncle Stanley bought me a suit that I had, a blue suit, black suit, can't remember. Because my mother was now, a single parent, because I was 9 or 10. She hadn't remarried till I was 12. And like I said, I had some doubts later on. But all my Sunday school teachers were not like Hallie Mitchell, but I had an immediate desire to read God's Word. And I thought, well, I'll start from the beginning. Nobody told me to do that. And also God began, dealing with me about just certain things in my life. And so I would start reading the Bible and maybe forget where I was left off and start over again, because I wasn't consistent, but definitely had that desire. And that's mainly it as far as those early times. The next time that God got my attention, arrested my steps again, was when I was about 16. So that's 16 or 17, and then again at 19. Those were revival times in my life. So now I'm a teenager, or an older teenager. I'd already kind of made some mistakes that I shouldn't have made. Thankfully, I didn't. And I really believe thanks to my grandparents and my parents' prayers, and probably my aunts and uncles, didn't get into nearly all the things I could have gotten into. Didn't kill anybody, didn't steal cars like some of my friends did, or later on, or bicycles, or never had to go to jail and all that kind of stuff, thankfully. But I was into somewhere around 10, 11, started getting into R&B music, and that became an addiction that didn't really get free of until I was in my late 20s. But God just dealt with me at age 17 just about just being sold out to Him the whole lordship thing again. And that was a revival time. I remember all the details. And it happened again. I got off again around somewhere around 18 and 19. And then 19, God got my attention again. And it was either at 17 or 19, because I was in the youth choir at the church called the Divine Choraleers. And St. John Divine, so Divine Choraleers. The pastor, Lewis W. Smith, named all of the choirs. And I remember we were going to have a choir party. And I think I was 17 at the time. And I was reading in the scriptures about these lists of sins in Ephesians. And one of them was, I can't remember the actual passage right now, but one of them, it had to do with, the translation is reveling. And so I looked it up and studied it, or asked somebody, because I didn't have a Strong's Concordance, Bible dictionary and all that stuff. But it was wild parties was the translation of it. And I said, well, we're not going to have a wild party. But we were going to have, probably maybe some Christian music, and like gospel probably would have been, and then maybe some R&B music. I can't remember, but I do remember that they were thinking about spiking the punch. And so as an older member of the youth choir, like 17, was all the way down to 12 and 13, I guess I appealed to our chaperones, our parent church leaders, who were kind of sponsoring this event, and said, should we really be doing this as a church group? I'm uncomfortable with this. Would you at least think about it? I don't remember being pushy. I just remember questioning it. Is this a good thing to do? I can't even remember where I was sitting when I talked to one of the ladies about it. It was a lady, and a young lady in the choir who was older than me, Mildred. It was her mother was one of the leaders, one of the chaperones. And Aunt Boo, Elizabeth, was one too. So they considered it, thought about it, and decided that it would just be red drink. It wouldn't be just whatever we had, probably Hawaiian punch, and it didn't have anything in it that was alcoholic. And it wasn't going to be anything strong anyway, but because the church wouldn't condone that probably. I can't remember if there was anything with the music at that time, but I think that was part of it as well. But I still was, I guess I was more careful about it at that time. So that, and then at 19 was just another time of revival. By this time I was in college. And the thing that I remember so much in college and being 19, New Orleans is hot, as you know, most of the year. As my family knows from all those trips there, even in November sometimes, and go for Thanksgiving, we can wear shorts or short sleeve shirts. Well, on the campus of the University of New Orleans, where I matriculated, the young ladies would dress in a way to be cool. Let's just put it that way. And I was a red-blooded young man, and so the way I survived at school was when I would walk, I would see, where do I have to go? Everything was straight, no hills, because it was New Orleans. And I would walk with my head down if I saw a young lady coming who was immodestly dressed. And that's how I dealt with it. So, and it really helped. Helped keep my thoughts where they should be. But I wish I could say that there was this steady progression, but it really was sometimes up, sometimes down. As the gospel song says, almost level to the ground. Had some, days with really down in the dumps spiritually, and some days when I was just really on the mountaintop. Not just the mountaintop in a sense of but in a sense of really being consistent, obedient. But Philippians 1:6 is one of my favorite verses. I'm confident of this very thing, that he would have begun a good work in you will perform it to the day of Christ. And I've really seen that. I really enjoyed high school. It was, even with the segregation, it wasn't segregated, it was integrated by that time, which is what caused a lot of the fights and all. But that's when I was thinking, pretty convinced I wanted to be a doctor. And so I was just absorbing the science courses, physics, chemistry, biology. I took a advanced placement biology course. I got to be in that course 2 hours a day. And it was just wonderful. And, maybe it's because of something from my grandfather. I don't remember that. Uncle Wayne remembered about gaining knowledge, but I still remember so much of what I've learned. Most of it I've forgotten, but I remember a lot of what I've learned in high school and college. Even the courses I didn't like very much, like psychology and sociology and things like that. But even I learned to like sociology. But sciences and the math courses were the best. And I had some good friends too that I met during that time. So it was a good time. So I went to University of New Orleans, which wasn't that far away. You can walk from there. It was another 1.5 miles, so 3 miles from my house. The high school, John F. Kennedy, was 1.5 miles, and I did walk some time, but had a car off and on. By the time I got to college, I got a car most of the time. But sometimes I had to catch the bus or get a ride. But Uncle Thomas Mims, who's now a doctor. And so went there starting in 1976, majored in biological sciences, and just really was pre-med to become a doctor, but God had other plans. So by this time, a lot of there were still, I think, racial tensions, but I think it was just something about the way I was raised that, particularly from Papa, he said, Brian, some people will not like you just because of the color of your skin. He said, but don't let that bother you, because that's their problem. They're missing out on a relationship with you. So it's their loss. He didn't say their problem, it's their loss. So you make the effort, but if they don't want to do it, talk to you, be friends with you because of the color of your skin, just let it go. And I think that's what I did. So the people I would get to know were the people that wanted to. Red and yellow, black and white. So at University of New Orleans, there were 4 sections. There was the white section in the cafeteria. There was the black section in the University Center, where the cafeteria was housed also. White section, black section, light-skinned black section, and the section for the fraternities and the sorority, frat brothers and sorority sisters. I didn't pledge, so I never went in the frat section, but I would go in the other 3 sections. Same thing, because I had friends and all the ones. I mean, they might be potential study partners, Bible study people. So during that time is when I started going to the UNO Bible study. And Mom might remember this. Hopefully she got it right in her part, but I don't remember if I met them there. At UNO, I think that's maybe where I met, who's now Pastor Garrison, Charles Garrison, and his wife, Geraldine. Geraldine was not a Christian at the time, but later became a Christian. And that Bible study was extremely helpful. So that part of that revival at age 19 probably has something to do with attending that Bible study, and later on, Audrey and Felix Johnson's Bible study in Gentilly that they would have on Tuesday night. It was called the Tuesday Night Bible Study. There was no other place to go on Tuesday night. So I was one of Charles Garrison's assistants eventually, once he thought I was worthy of that. And also Calvin Williams was an assistant, even though Calvin was the, and I know Charles would agree with this, he was deeper in the Word than we were, but Charles just had that leadership ability, that ability to draw people to himself, and he was powerful at sharing the gospel, just mighty in doing that. So that was really good. We met twice a week, I think, maybe 3 times a week, at different times because of different people's schedules. That was really good. So, unfortunately, so by this time, I'm way before then kind of connected again with my father, that my children call Big Papa, biological father. And he said, Brian, you don't have to finish school in 4 years. But see, I was ruined. I wanted to go from high school to medical school, if I could. If there was a way, I wasn't, of course, prepared to do that with the courses I needed. But I really didn't I just wanted to take the courses I needed for medical school and skip everything else. So to me, it was too much time. I wanted to get to that place where I can be a doctor. So I decided, okay, it takes me time to absorb material. I'm a plotter in doing it. I'm not a fast reader, and so it takes me longer, but when I get it, I usually get it. So I said, what I'll do, I'm not going to take 18 hours a semester. I'll take 14 or 15 hours, and I'll go to summer school. And my father, biological father, began to see that it was affecting me, but I didn't see it. And so by the time I got into my junior year, so I did fall, spring, summer, Dean's List every semester. And by the time I got into my junior year, I'm thinking, okay, now I'm done with these core courses. Some of them I placed out of. I think I started with calculus or trigonometry or something like that. But I should have studied for the tests. I could have placed out some other things too. Because I had such a good foundation in high school. It's not so much of me, but I had a really good foundation, good teachers. By the time I got to my junior year, I started getting mentally tired. It was more difficult to take in the information, even if I really enjoyed the topic, the subject. But I persevered, kept going. At the same time, there's family members with all these health problems. So my grandmother, so this is 1978, 79. My grandmother's health started going down more. She's, bedridden now. Thank God for Aunt Boo being the main caregiver, and others, Aunt Rosanna, Uncle Stanley, my mother, and then Jewel would come into town all the time, Uncle Harold, and they couldn't do day to day, but they would do a lot when they came into town. And their spouses were just great in letting them do that. But, people needed rides. I was one of the oldest grandchildren, in the area. Cousin Stanley, who was my age, went to college out of state at Meharry at first, and then came back and went to Xavier locally. I think Jeffrey went to Xavier. So I was transporting Aunt Boo, who didn't drive, transporting my grandfather sometimes, transporting, doing things to help people get word. So this person's in the hospital, and my mother was in the hospital off and on during that time over the years. So it was really challenging, just that. And because, as far as I was concerned, I just had average intelligence anyway, I couldn't handle all this. So, but unfortunately, I didn't listen to Big Papa's advice, and I just kept going. And I think one of the first times I realized I had to stop was when I was taking a course in German. So it was either my second or my third German course, and I really loved studying German. I still think it's a great language, and English is a Germanic language, so the grammar was easier than Spanish. So I studied for the test. I was prepared for the test. I went to take the test. And when I got the paper, of course it wasn't online, just a paper, all I knew to do was write my name and the date. I didn't know the answers to anything. And I had dropped some courses before. Those were clues that my wise, father, Big Papa, realized. I can't remember anyone else telling me, but he did. And so I ended up, I think that's when I dropped out the first time. Then I came back too soon, dropped out again. So basically, long story short, I ended up squeezing 4 years of college into 7 years, from 1976 to 1983. The bad news is, if I just listened to my father, Big Papa, I probably could have done it at least in 5.5. Going slower and not doing summer school. And I was also in as many as 6 choirs at one time. So I was doing that too. During the summer, it would be 6 choirs. During the school year, it would be 3 choirs, including 1 choir that would travel during the summer. So that took a lot of time. I was active in church. So just all those things didn't. The good news is employers want to know that you finished. But I didn't know that back then. I was just trying to get to medical school, and I went about it the wrong way. Yes, I probably couldn't accurately say what all the influences were, but the ones that would come to mind would be 5 or 6 men. One would be, of course, my biological father. Early on, just the fact that he was there and then he wasn't there. I don't understand all the details behind that. I was just a child, but obviously that's had lasting impacts in my life. But when I reconnected with him later on, which I'm so grateful that Papa was willing to allow to happen, even allowing him to come over to his house to see me. He was that comfortable and that secure in his relationship with Mama and his relationship with me that he did that. That only happened once that I can remember, because he wanted me to meet someone, a fellow preacher, because my father eventually became a preacher. But my grandfather was one of the primary influences, because he was continuous for 31 years, from the time I was born until he went to be with the Lord in 1989. And he was a man's man. He took care of his family. As he said, he worked 7 days, 8 nights a week. And he expected discipline. He was a disciplined man, which allowed him to work the hours he worked, but still do the other things he needed to do, is like teach Sunday school, when eventually, after he became a Christian and all, and be a deacon and all that, and take time with his children. So that was a real model to me. I saw him as being there, and he was definitely a father figure. The next person before Pawpaw was Uncle Stanley, my mother's second oldest brother. I loved being in their home. Because there was the father and there was the mother and there were the children. And to me, they were rich. They actually lived in the same neighborhood that my parents used to live in. Pontchartrain Park, which was built after World War II, and a lot of lower middle class, I guess, or middle class blacks were able to move into, I would say, middle class. So it wasn't a big house. It was 2 bedrooms, maybe 3 bedrooms and a bath, and some people would add on a den and another bath maybe. but a little carport, driveway. But it was this nice area, and I just felt this is particularly during that time before my parents remarried. They would kind of treat me like a third child, kind of. And I found out later on, actually offered to adopt me. So I just admired Uncle Stanley so much throughout his life, the time that I knew him, because particularly when he became a Christian, I think he was already a Christian, but when he really committed his life to the Lord, he was all in. And he would lead the family devotions. And so I watched him do that. He's the one I saw do that. So that was really, really a good thing. I mean, others would do it too, but let me do it sometimes. Of course, when Uncle Eric came along, he would do it, particularly since he was a preacher, pastor, assistant pastor. The other person was Papa. And Papa went to work every day. Every day was time to go to work. Monday through Friday, work on weekends, work his regular job. And then he had his side business that he would work in the evenings and on weekends, and just a commitment to excellence in what he did, the high quality of the work. So he didn't have to go after business. People called him because they saw what he did. And since he did tile and terrazzo and other floors like hardwood floors, all types of floors, he's just, sometimes he could just say no, particularly when he was part-time doing it. Big regret is that I didn't learn that trade. He said he wanted me to go to college so I wouldn't have to work for a living. And my knees are in a lot better shape than his, probably because of that. The other person was Uncle Duffy, Aunt Ju's husband. I saw him as being like Papa, like Uncle Stanley, as they were just like rocks. You could just count on them the next day and the next week and the next month. I wasn't concerned growing up about going hungry. Uncle Wayne and I probably too much, even though we probably needed that just to stay alive, but we always had enough food to eat and had a place to stay. And all we had to do was go to school, do our chores, didn't really have a lot of requirements, and not do stupid things, So, but Uncle Duffy, I didn't get to see him a lot, but when they would come in town, or when I went to visit them as a child, when they lived in Albuquerque, New Mexico, I went to accompany Mama so she could go visit. That was a real special trip. That's when I, probably really got to know my cousins, Michael, Sharon, Janet, and Aurelia. And would just cherish the time when they would come in. And Michael would usually stay with us since, he was a guy, and we had me and Uncle Wayne. But I don't know, Uncle Duffy just had wisdom about him as well. Uncle Harold was someone else that I learned dedication to family. There was nothing I felt like he wouldn't do for his family. And that's probably true with the others as well, but he would drive to New Orleans from Indianapolis. It's a long drive. Or he would fly. And if he came because Mama was in the hospital, or, then he would get off the plane and want to go straight to the hospital. Well, don't you want to, no. Don't you get something? No. No freshen up. No, he had already probably worked it out in advance, maybe, but he came for the purpose he came for. And I knew, even to this day, he would take a bullet for me. But, probably the same thing was true about Uncle Harold and someone else was that I really appreciate. My mother was in the hospital for about a year. And Pawpaw, that was tough. You know, where was I? I was in junior high school. So Uncle Wayne went to stay with my mom and Papa, and I went to stay with Uncle Joe and Aunt Rosanna, Janelle and Kevin, sorry. And I stayed there a whole year. They just treated me like a third child. Got to go on vacation with them to Florida, which was really nice. I'd never been to Florida. That's when I got even closer to my cousins. But Uncle Joe didn't have to do that. He could have said no to Aunt Rosanna. Obviously, my mom and Papa didn't have to do that, but they did. But I'm focusing on the influence. And so none of those men, just like me, are perfect. None of them were close to perfect. But they had qualities, many qualities, whether it's discipline, that's either stick-to-itiveness, working, willing to provide for their families, that love, you knew you were loved. That really just meant a lot. And Papa didn't talk a lot. He still doesn't talk a lot. But you know where he stood with you. And you knew that he's going to do stupid things, and I'm talking about stupid things like stealing a car or gambling and, things like that, gambling for money, trying to, he wasn't for foolishness.
So what's your definition then of a successful man? Would that be your people you've listed? Is that or talk about that?
Well, the part that I left out is really the most important part. I kind of alluded to it with Uncle Stanley, and that is, and I would say it too for Papa, really the first thing was being a spiritual leader. And they weren't always where they needed to be at that time. It's like I wasn't always where I needed to be at that time to have to do that. But that's the most important thing, because it's a father should submit to God. And that's when you submit to your immediate authority, that's how you can be a good leader. If you're not willing to submit to the person right above you, then you will struggle in some ways as a leader. So that's something that I learned, and I remember seeing Papa read his Bible at night. I remember Uncle Stanley, leading the family devotions. I remember hearing others talk about God. I remember when Papa became a Christian. I think it was in his 30s. Saw changes. So everybody grew to a certain extent, but that was a big deal. The other thing was that you're there. God first, family, and church, and work were my priorities. And that's what I saw modeled in some shape or form by others, but kind of focused on family members with them as well. So I tried to be home. For example, when I worked at IBM, I worked at the bank that was local. But when Bank of America, I worked at IBM starting in 1998. At one point, I had an opportunity to be a sales specialist, where you would kind of be meeting with customers, but that also may mean traveling in Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, depending upon what I was selling. Because these were mainframe customers and they were, major corporations. But I didn't do that so I could be home. And I kept putting it off and putting it off and putting off it because eventually it didn't make sense anymore. And I don't regret not doing that, even though I could have had the potential to earn more money from sales commissions. So being there was important. So being a spiritual man, a spiritual leader, being an example, even if you don't, let's say, whatever you say you stand for, then live that out. Even if some of the things you're standing for are not biblical because you don't see it or whatever, but at least don't be a hypocrite. And that's what I saw. I saw authenticity, and I wanted to be authentic so that if my children saw me in location A, hopefully it's the same way they saw me at home, location B. And the way they saw me somewhere else, location C, that I was acting the same way, positively or negatively, but at least I was consistent. And then to be a loving father, and if there's, obviously in most cases it's going to be a wife, mother, to love your wife. That was really important. So that's why I told my children, there are a lot of things that you might be able to get away with, or that I would just discipline you for, like maybe with the spanking or some other type of discipline. But there's one thing that you could not do that could cause you to be put out the house. We'll find somewhere else for you to live. And that is, you could not disrespect your mother. And I think, speaking of Daniel, you mentioned Daniel, one of the reasons Daniel is the man that he is, two reasons, is because the way he respects his mother, and having had six sisters, he knew how to treat women in his age range, since he was almost like a middle child. He and Val were like the middle ones, being the third born of 7. And he knew how to respect his mother. And generally speaking, the way a man treats his mother is the way he'll treat his wife. And I knew that. And so, but I just knew that he needed to do that. And I think I really learned that, saw that with Paul, was the first one I saw that with.
If you could comment on the way society is now and the need for more strong families like that, the more need for stronger men like that. If you could talk about that need that exists there as well.
Yes, there's so many facets to it. I don't have exact statistics on this, but if you go back to the 1950s, 1940s, and you look in, say, what are now called inner city areas like Harlem, New York, or other places around the country that had high minority populations and generally poor populations or lower middle class. If you go back and look at the stats, the marriage success rate or the divorce rate was lower in those communities than they were among other ethnic groups. Now we're at the bottom. So I think it's Asians, whites, maybe Hispanics, and then blacks as far as the lowest divorce rate, which means there's also a high rate of children born out of wedlock in the African American community. So why did that happen? What made that happen? Well, I don't know the answer to all those questions, but I do know we went from being more of a community-based, centered around the Christian church, the black church, with that leadership from the pastor, and then those fathers and mothers in homes who they didn't necessarily raise the other children in the neighborhood, not so much like a village, but they cared enough about them so it was almost like they were raising them. So you could get a spanking at school and then get another spanking at home. You could be do something in a neighborhood 5 blocks from home, and then that person walks you home and tells your parent. That takes time, takes effort. You can miss a lot of YouTube videos taking the time to walk that child over there. We've gotten away from that. And I think one thing that hurt us was we've developed a dependent mentality in the Black community and a victim mentality. Have we been oppressed? Big time. Is it nearly as bad now as it was 150, 200 years ago? Nowhere close. But if you listen to the propaganda machines, the people who try to keep America divided, then you would think we're still in slavery, or you would think we still have Jim Crow laws, which required segregation in the South, or still had segregation in the North, or racism and all that. Are there still people who are racist? Yes. Bigots? Yes. Prejudice? Yes. Is it like it used to be? Nowhere close. Nowhere close. So with the victim mentality and the dependent mentality, somebody has to take care of you, and somebody has to try to tell you the way to think. And that's not the way it was in Harlem way back with those strong families. Not the way it was in Philadelphia or in New Orleans when I went to school, or in Chicago or in LA, but now look how it is. I mean, these places are powder kegs, high homicide rates. Cleveland, Detroit, Philly, Chicago. It's that happened, and I think it was a breakdown in the family and getting away from the church, and maybe the church had some problems too. I can't, I think in some cases that was the case, some cases that was not the case, but, and I think the other thing was materialism. Once, we were able to have more rights, it's very easy to say, well, I'm going to have what the white man had, kind of a thing. And instead of saying, well, what do we really need? Do I really need that? And what is it going to cost me? What is it going to cost my family to do that? So your mother and I, we, thanks to the counsel of Calvin Williams, that man who was one of the leaders of the Bible study we looked up to with great admiration, he sat down with us and talked to us about the benefits of a stay-at-home mom, a stay-at-home wife even. That it's not a sin for her to work, but these are the benefits. So we wanted to give ourselves the best opportunity to succeed, given that our children are going to have these very imperfect parents who are just learning and, seriously practicing on Carissa, our oldest. So, and then continuing to learn and still learning, even though our youngest is 19, 20 next month. So I think that was really caused a lot of the breakdown, and it's really not going to be an easy thing to get back, but we have to go back to where we were. We have to go back to our biblical roots that was really strong even during the time of slavery. You would think that we would reject the so-called white man's God, but it was because of, and I'm going to put a plug in here can I plug a book? I'm going to plug Dr. Tony Evans' book. He's pastor of Oak Cliff Bible Church in Dallas, Texas. He wrote a book called Oneness Embraced, and in that book he shows how the African traditional religion, which was in what we now know as West Nigeria, how that was what the slaves knew, because many of them came from that area. of the Atlantic, and they came over and they were introduced to Jehovah and his son, Jesus Christ, and the qualities of the God that they were worshiping in African traditional religion, who they called Olodumare. His qualities were very, very similar to Jehovah. Sovereignty and all those kind of things. Perfection, all those things that you see in God. So they were ready to be introduced to Christianity. They saw a disconnect, though. They said, these slave owners and these other people who look at us as second class, even look at us as animals, in other words, non-blacks, not all, obviously, but the ones that did, they just don't realize who Jesus is, who God is. They don't understand the Bible. It's bizarre. So that's our roots, and we can go back to that. The other thing is, a recommitment to marriage. So to be committed to being, pure until marriage, sexually pure, and then being faithful after marriage. If you mess it up, you start from where you messed up, just like I did with the stealing. You started from where I was, and with the many other sins that I committed. So, and then I think, really the husband and wife working together so that the children, even if they disagree, which my wife and I did many times, we tried to give one response. And when we didn't, it was a disaster. When we did, it worked out well. And so when we disagreed and we gave one response, y'all didn't know. Carissa doesn't like me to say this, our oldest, but, and so I'm trying to stop saying it, but I believed for many, many years, for decades, that my children's biggest disadvantage was me because of all the baggage I brought into the relationship. But God helped me see, open my eyes and helped me see that, yes, I do have faults, but God did teach me a lot, like we've already talked about, and I did bring some positive things and did do a lot of positive things. I really believe some of the things we talked about, working together as a team, and Mom's unique, she grew up in a home where they stayed together. The parents stayed together. That was a tremendous help for her. She felt that sense of security that I didn't have for part of my life. And that has an impact on you. I really don't understand the complete impact, but it does. So Mom was also a saver. We don't talk about that much. And she learned that from her father. So she was also, she would devour the scriptures. When she became a Christian at age 21, she was, reading the Bible hours at a time, and hours a day sometimes, even though she was taking a lot of credit hours in college. So she can finish in 4 years in one summer, I think. So it's about 4 years. And she's been, consistent often, throughout the years. So just a love for the Word of God, a commitment to, we've also been faithful in tithing. You're not supposed to let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. Right hand knows what your left hand is doing, but I think it's important to mention that in giving. And we've never disagreed about that. We decided that before we got married, that we would tithe and give offerings on top of that, as the Lord provided and He led. Mom is nurturing also. Janice is, I never had a concern, unless she was not well physically, that she was not willing and able and totally committed to take care of our children when I was at work or at a men's prayer retreat or out of town for a trip, or so going for the day or going for a week at a time. I wasn't concerned about that. I wasn't concerned that you all wouldn't be fed, clothed, bathed, protected. She would give her life. So, and just, the support that she's given me. Something that you may not know, Jennifer, is that when I was promoted to assistant vice president at Bank of America, I was really excited about that. I remember contacting my dear friend Dwayne Vaughn, who y'all affectionately call Uncle Dwayne, and Stephanie. And he said, I have a suggestion for you. As usual, always challenging me to do something good. And he said, you should send Janice a thank you letter because of all the support she's giving you. Oh, yeah, she's done a letter? Write a letter? I don't want to write a letter. But I said, I should do that. So I said, but I could just tell her. But anyway, I eventually agreed to do it. He said, no emails. Write a letter and mail it. Type it. Send it. I don't know if she still has it or not, but I did that. And that taught me something I learned from Papa that was a reminder of that, is that he said that one of the worst sins you can commit is the sin of ungratefulness or ingratitude. And Uncle Dwayne also taught me the value of a second thank you. So he said, wait 6 months and then thank her again. And I can't remember if I did that in that situation, but I've done that even recently with somebody because Uncle Dwayne taught me that. Another example of a father I could have mentioned. But I learned a lot from him. So she had a lot of good qualities, but her support really meant so much. And because we made the decision when Mom was expecting Iris, our second born, we waited until we could afford to do it, to be full-time at home. She did some part-time things later, but to stop working full-time, because we did that, she was really able to nurture and develop her great cooking skills and a bunch of other skills that she has. So basically, she saves us a lot of money. I think what I brought into it was, and some of these things will be true for Mom too, just truth is everything to me. What is true, finding out what's true, and then doing that. And hopefully not being overbearing in doing it, which is a real weakness for people who care about truth. You want everybody to see what you see and implement it. So I'm still learning. The other thing was I wanted our children to be taught the Word of God. So I wanted them to be in a church where they would get good sound teaching, good sound preaching, and where they wouldn't be tempted to do this when they were listening to the teachers and the preachers, because those teachers and preachers were godly examples. Same thing I would want from me and my wife. So we had family devotion, and the family devotions would be multifaceted, but they were all about trying to teach valuable things. They all had a biblical focus, and we spent a lot of time in the scriptures. But I also did extensive studies about finances, some things I put to sleep. But we talked economics, we talked accounting, we talked budgeting, we talked, I basically couldn't teach you how to fix anything, but I could teach you about money, and I could teach you, how to exegete the scriptures and how to that. And that's why you had you and your siblings had an insight book. Can't remember where I got that idea from. But basically it was to help you get into the discipline of having a time of Bible reading and prayer time every day, and that you would just record the date, what you read, and if God showed you anything. Well, what if God doesn't teach me anything? That's okay. That's okay. That's what I would say when y'all would ask that. Just put the date, what you read. And what happens at first, it's like, oh man, am I done yet? And we would talk about how much you would read and all that. But it's very interesting to me that, I see now that you guys are all older, still a faithfulness in spending time in God's Word. Because Mom and I are going to die one day. Or we're not going to be the ones to tell you what to do. But we knew the Holy Spirit will always be there. And God's Word always be there. And if you have Jesus living inside of you, once all of you became Christians, and you have the Holy Spirit guiding you, the Spirit of Christ, and then you have His Word. If you got everything we told you, that's okay. You still had the Bible.
Do you feel like not that you've arrived, but do you feel like you've been able to father a successful family?
Because I'm a perfectionist, that's a really good question. And I did mention some other success things. If you had asked me that 3 years ago, I probably would have said no. And there are many times Satan tells me no, because I have the mind of an editor. And so the editor sees what's not right and doesn't just bypass, oh, that's right. So the editors, it's just not, usually, as the time goes on, there are fewer and fewer things to fix, whether it's a document, a technical paper I had to edit and even write technical papers with IBM, or you just, putting that in a loan document or something with Bank of America. So, or looking at my family, say, wow, Carissa has all these qualities. Valerie has all these qualities, but this one thing, what she would work on, So that would make me think, see, if you'd been a better father, she would be doing that one thing and not being concerned about the other 15 wonderful things Valerie is doing. So, the answer to the question is yes, we have been successful because God has helped me look at it the right way, and I'm finally listening to what other people have told us. And then you start seeing, you really don't know, as Mrs. Banker, who's with the Lord now, Mr. Banker's wife, she said, you don't know if you're a successful parent until you see how your children raise their children. So I'm waiting for that step. To me, that's the ultimate, to see how that happens. I don't think, so like one of the things that we did that I think is important is that we didn't give you everything we could have. We made sure you had what you needed, and we did enjoy blessing and going above and beyond, and but we wanted you all to have a grateful spirit, and we were extremely successful in that. And I know Uncle Wayne, when he hears this, will agree with me, and others as well, Pawpaw, many others, very grateful spirits. So that was by design. And one way you develop a grateful spirit is by not giving your children everything they want, even if you can afford it. We couldn't even afford everything somebody might want. But make sure you give them what they need. And if they, because God promises to provide that if we seek Him first. And then teach them the value of it along the way. Teach them the importance of work. Give them chores. It's not going to damage them psychologically if they clean the commode. It's not. If they make their beds, if they sweep the floor, wash the dishes, they'll be fine. And so we did that. And that's why you guys know how to do that. And you're all hardworking, diligent, talented in many areas. And thanks to Mom, good looking. So, But I really appreciate that, and I see that gratefulness and even a spirit of humility among all of you as well. Maybe a couple more things. If I could go back to the issue I talked about with when you asked me to bring up the so-called race issue,
Mm-hmm.
I really don't even like using the term, because once you use that term, it implies there's more than one, because there's really just the human race. It's one blood. We're all descendants of Adam. So as I've told some people, we're really related. So if you want to give me a birthday gift, even though it's distant, I'm fine with that. It hasn't worked yet, but I'll keep trying. But the thing I wanted to point out is some things I've been learning from another book, and also from Oneness Embrace, and a lot that I've learned from Mr. Stallard, who's with the Lord now. He was really one of the first people to help me with a lot of this. And before that, it was Pastor John McNeil Jr. at Atlanta Bible Baptist Church, and Dwayne Vaughn really helped me in these areas. But and that is, and I just saw this yesterday, and I was looking at it again this morning while you were interviewing Mom. The verse in Matthew, I think it's Matthew 16:18, and Jesus said to Peter, "And thou art Peter," which means a little stone that can be easily thrown. So it's just a little stone that can be easily, that's what it means. And upon this rock, I will build my church. So the stone is Petros. It can be easily thrown, just pick it up, throw it. But Petra, Jesus, the rock, is a mass or cliff of rocks. So Jesus is this mass, cliff of rocks. And each believer, that he's the foundation and the chief cornerstone. And that every believer is a stone. It's like Peter, a little stone. And we all fit in, like Ephesians 2, Peter calls us lively stones. So he understood exactly what Jesus was talking about in 1 Peter 2:5. And then Paul in Ephesians 2:20 through 22 talked about the foundation where Jesus is the chief cornerstone, and that we are built upon that. So here's, if I could find an artist to draw this, I would like to find somebody to do this. Here's all these massive rocks, individual rocks that make up the Lord Jesus Christ. He's still Jesus, not many gods. And then all these little stones, then he is supporting. So the key in ending the disunity is for the church to deal with this problem. Dr. John Perkins talks about it in his book, One Blood. He says that's the only way it's going to happen. Dr. Evans talks about it in his books, including the one I'm reading now and another one I read. I believe you mentioned that a long time ago when he wrote in the 90s. But the key is many stones makes one church. So many stones make unity. It's the analogy that we've always had until the last decade or so in the United States. We were called a melting pot. All these immigrants came from all those different nations looking for a better life. But they learned English. They got inculcated into our culture. They became patriots. They saluted the American flag. They wanted to work hard. They picked up the American values, but didn't forget their Germanic or Irish or whatever their heritage was, whether it's European or Asian or some country in the continent of Africa. It didn't matter. They came here and they were Americans through all these years. And so it was a melting pot. We came together, many became one. Now we're called a salad. Salads don't mix. It's still a tomato, still lettuce, still a cucumber. You may eat it all together, but they don't mix. That's not the way to have a country. And that's not the way to have a church. So Jesus did not come, to quote Dr. Evans, to start a black church, or a white church, or a Hispanic church, or a non-denominational church, or a National Baptist Convention of America church, or a Southern Baptist church, or a denominational church of any kind. He came to start his church. And you can have all those different names, that's fine. You can have all those different denominations, that's fine. I'm not saying that that's a problem. But the many need to function as one. And when we do that, that's when we will fulfill Jesus's yet unanswered prayer in America, that we will be one. In John 17, as he and the Father are one. And that's when we'll see serious revival in our country, in Great Awakening, I believe, because the church will be powerful when we do that. We really love each other like we should. The other thing I wanted to mention is I consider myself really privileged in several ways to have had the honor of being married to your mother, to Janice, to having had the privilege of raising 7 children. We had 4 miscarriages. I hope to see those children in heaven. I still weep for them sometimes. Because I didn't get to see them. Of course, I would have seen some of them. I wouldn't have seen some of you. So, but that's, I think they're all individual persons. We also pinched myself that I had the privilege of going to the UNO Bible study, hearing Hallie Mitchell, share the gospel with me, hearing it from Reverend Newman, being able to be in so many different choirs and learn from so many different people, like Ronald James, who I found later on was a distant cousin, to have, the examples of aunts and uncles and grandparents. And then when we moved to Atlanta, because I needed a job, to be a member of Atlanta Bible Baptist Church for 10 years and Calvary Baptist Church for, I guess, the last 23, 24 years or so, maybe 23 years. And be under the type teaching and preaching, to learn so many things that we did. It was like going through a Bible college, being an ATI, Advanced Training Institute. Just the materials were so good. To go to the prayer advances, the prayer encounters with Harold Vaughn and Tom Palmer and Dr. Gibbs, and hearing all these different speakers. And to have people around me like my brother Wayne and Dwayne Vaughn, and people who cared enough about me to tell me what I really needed to know all these years, and not concerned that they would damage the relationship. They knew that faithful are the wounds of a friend. So I consider myself extremely blessed for someone that grew up as a poor black boy from the ghetto. And it's quite an honor to have my precious daughter Jennifer do this interview as well.
Or what was it like growing up with your cousins?
Well, there were basically 8 of us, if I count correctly, that were in the New Orleans area once everybody was born. So Aunt Boo had Eric and Terry is the youngest first cousin. And then Aunt Rosanna had Janelle, as my children affectionately called, and her nieces and nephews, Titi Nell, and Kevin. And then Uncle Stanley and Jeffrey, Stanley Jr., and Jeffrey with a G. And of course, me and Uncle Wayne. So the 8 of us really were like brothers and sister, since we only had one girl here. So it was really cool for TT Nell when the Johnsons would come in town, because then she had three more girls, Sharon, Jen, and Aurelia. We just enjoyed being together as a family, whether it's the gathering place at Uncle Stanley's house, at my grandparents' house, my parents' house, at Rosanna's house. It could be at Aunt Shirley's parents' house, the Antoines. We did a lot of things there. In fact, I almost died there one time, choking on a chicken bone, and then Rosanna saved my life. But that was one of at least 2 times she saved my life. So we just enjoyed playing games, whether it was football or playing tag, depending upon the age. And as we got older, we would try to get together and maybe meet and go get some donuts and coffee or milk or something. Or I used to work out with Cousin Stanley at the UNO gym, and we would jog, we go swimming, different things. And of course, we might be at Bible studies together, family devotion. We get together just for the purpose of family devotion and do that. So I think we were really, really close. It's one of the reasons that it was hard to leave New Orleans to move here. So it was like every 4 years, the Johnsons, Uncle Duffy's, and Uncle Duffy and our Jewish children, and they would come in town because Uncle Duffy would change a duty station. That was my understanding. And then whenever they settled down in Indianapolis, we could see them more often. So that was always nice when they would come in and get a chance to spend time with them. So, and then would have loved to have seen Uncle Harold's children more, but I remember when Steve came and one time and spent a lot of time with our parents at my house. And he's close to Uncle Wayne's age, so probably spent a little bit more time with Uncle Wayne, but just remember those times. And so, yeah, they're really like brothers and sisters to me. And that's the way we treat each other now. And that's probably why you all refer to TT Nell as TT Nell and Uncle Eric as Uncle Eric, and it's, we just enjoy time together. We did a lot of eating. A lot. I don't know why they ate so much food, but a lot of my male cousins did. But I tried to be a good example.
Tell a story. Oh, it's my favorite story. The story where Janelle invited all 6 of your girlfriends to your birthday party.
Your younger sister Hannah asked me that question when she and I went to Jason's Deli to get a sandwich, soup or something. And at the time, I was really dating, I think, 3 young ladies. I don't remember. So I was 16. I was turning 16. It was a surprise birthday party. Now you tell me, was it 6?
You said you had 6 main chicks and then 3.
No, 3 main ones.
3 main chicks and
That's
then
right.
3 side chicks.
Right. So what happened was, I don't remember who the 3 main ones were. Mom was nowhere in the picture at this time. I didn't meet her until college again after elementary school. But TT Nell invited some of them because she wasn't happy about that, even though I gave full disclosure. In my mind, that was the okay way to do it. Going back to being a successful person, that's not something you should do. It should be one committed relationship at a time. So she invited 1 or 2 of the young ladies there at the party. And so I thought, I can't believe she did that. So I ignored them and spent time with other young ladies. And that's where the other 4, 5, or 6 came from. But I don't remember most of their names. That was a shame. Hannah was asking me the names of all my girlfriends, and I could. It's good that I don't, I guess. I mean, I've been married 39 years now. I need to have a single focus. Number one, One woman man. So we had talked about sharing a riddle, and here's one that I thought about actually just this morning, and that is big party. This all relates to me. Big party, one clue. Second clue, newcomer. Third clue, years later, 1969. Many, many, many years later, and now into the future, 2042. And then a little bit farther into the future, hopefully, 2048. What's the riddle? What's the answer?